I'll hit continue.
Perfect. All right, this week's guest on the Inside Running podcast is one of the most influential people in the history of Australian distance running. As an athlete, he is a two-time Olympian and a four-time representative at the World Cross Country Championships. And as a coach, has coached some of Australia's greatest ever distance runners, including Steve Moneghetti, the late Karen McCann, and Craig Mottram at the end of his career, just to name a few. Chris was also the head coach of the Australian track and field team at the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games and has a wealth of knowledge on the distance running scene. Welcome to the Inside Running podcast, and thanks for giving up some time. Chris Wardlaw, or are we calling you Rab? Which one do you want, Chris? Chris or Rab?
Yeah, thanks, Brady. No, I in athletic circles, it's normally Rab. Some people keep calling me Chris, but, mainly it's Rab, and, happy I've had that nickname forever. I think people use it lovingly, so I'm happy with it.
Well, my co-host Julian Spence, who I do the podcast with, he wanted me to ask the first question: where did the nickname come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I sometimes wonder myself. It definitely started at school. I went to Melbourne High, and I'm pretty sure one of my mates, who died, a dozen years ago, Roback. He gave us all our nicknames, all our friends and so forth, and I copped Rabbit. And it was because if you see me running, and there's footage in the old world, I'm very upright and prance a little bit. So that was a bit of the way it started. And of course, like all nicknames, it got shortened. So Rabbit's been lost, and it's just plain Rab now. And my grandkids call me Rab as well.
Yeah, awesome. And that was a pretty big introduction. Like, I've done a lot of these interviews and, planned introductions for, I think I've done about 150, 160 kind of interviews, but your one has many aspects to it. And I'm always interested, like, how do you introduce yourself when you're talking to people? Which aspect do you go with?
Yeah, I love being a 10,000 metre finalist at the Olympics. People who, aspire to do really well, I think they recognise what that means. And I have to say, in the old days, we did a heat and a final, unlike, today, where they just roll around for one final. We did it hard in our day. So I do like to say an Olympic finalist. I love the coaching, and, I've loved my relationships with a whole heap of people, not just the Monas and the Kerens, people that I've worked with over the years who have got their own PBs, not at that level, but they aspired to, get to a high level, and I've loved being part of that. One thing that's sort of forgotten, but the fun run world sort of would understand, I'm the only Australian to have won the City to Surf and Beta Breakers. And the other person who's done it is the great Kenny Moore, who was fourth in the Olympics, and of course one of our foremost riders. And he, as an American, won both of them. So I'm proud of that, because people like Mona and that didn't, and Jared Barrett and so forth didn't. So I'm pretty happy with that one.
There's a good claim to fame. Often on this podcast, we start with people's PBs. So if you've got any interesting stories about these PBs, feel free to add them in. So I've got your 5K down as 13:34 in 1977. You were fifth in the race. Can you remember any other details about it? What happened? Where was it?
Yeah, it was at Melbourne, and it was in the days when we had pretty good crowds, and we had all the we had a big a load of people who came out for it, including people like Hildenbrand, who'd won the bronze at the Olympics. All the Australians were there. It was one of my really, really good races. I would consider myself the least talented high-performance athlete in the history of the universe. I wasn't very fast at all, and I can tell you how my 800 PB was worked at to get under 2 minutes. To run 1:59 was a big, big thing for me, and I had to do some extra effort to get there. But I ended up, being able to run 2 minutes, coming home in a 1500 and, fast at the end of the 5K. But that 5K PB, because of the crowd, and I played the crowd. I took the lead at about 500, and just in time for the crowd to give a bit of a roar. It's one of my more pleasing PBs. At the time, I think the world record was about 13:13. So it was a pretty good run. And have I been knocked out of all-time lists in 5K and 10K.
Yeah.
Sort of hanging in a bit in the marathon, which might be another.
Yeah, we'll get to that
discussion why that may have happened. So that my 10K PB has a bit of a story to it.
So the 28:15, and you nearly you just missed it at the Olympics, though, didn't you? We had 28:17 at the Olympics. Yeah.
So at the Olympics, I ran 28:17, and in the final 28:28 or 29, something like that. 4 days apart. Anyway, my feet are still feeling it. But the 28:15.6, I actually set up the race, and some people have joked that I produced, directed, and starred in the race. And I love film, so I like that sort of notion. But I got people from around the country to try and come, Max Little and Jimmy Langford from WA, and Steve Austin, I think, was in it, and a couple of others. And we ran it after a pro meet at Olympic Park because we had to find a time to do it. And I'd improved radically. I'd taken a minute out of my PB, and I saw myself on the curve, and I thought I could get the qualifier. At the time, I think it was 28:40 or 30. I've forgotten what it was. Anyway, I ran it, and I always remember it was pretty windy. In fact, I'm going to say we needed grappling hooks to get up the straight. And I was a bit worried about the wind, and we shared the pace. In those days, we just shared the pace. We didn't have a pacemaker. So, we'd take 2 laps each.
Yeah.
But I was worried, and Pat Clohessy, who was my coach, he obviously thought I was a bit worried because I was a bit worried about the wind. And anyway, Ron Clark had come down. This was I think we ran at about 10 o'clock at night after the pro meet. And Ron Clark came across and proceeded to tell me how actually a wind could be an advantage. You float with the wind, and then you work, really work into it. And actually it's better than no wind. I believed him because he was Ron Clark.
Yeah.
If Clarkey says that, so I forgot about it. But in that race, I actually ran the last 400 last 5,000 in under 14 minutes. So I was about 13:58. So it was a really, really good run. But anyway, we had hand times in those days, no electronic timing. And the way you timed it was you had 3 watches, which I'd organised, officials and so forth. And Pat Clohessy held one of the watches. And one of the watches was 28:15.3. One was 28:15.8. And Chloe had the middle watch, which was 28:15.4, which was 2/10, or it might have been 1/10 ahead of Clarkey's record, which was the best by an Australian at the time in Australia when he'd run his 28:15.6, which was the world record when he ran it. And I very quickly said, Chloe, can we call yours 28:15.6? Because I want to be equal with Clarkey. I don't want to break it.
Oh, right.
So it's a bit like, our Australian captain who equaled Bradman's record, the 3:34 not out. So that's part of the story. But the rest of the story is that I broke the record, and it was an Australian record, and I got the certificate. Several months after, David Fitzsimons had broken my time about 2 weeks later when he ran 28:12. So I only held it for about 2 weeks. Anyway, it's one of those stories that, it's sort of in my memory, and God knows how much embellished it is now.
Oh, that's okay. We can add a bit of mayonnaise to these stories a few years on, that's for sure. And then your marathon, the 2:11:55, when you come 7th at the Fukuoka Marathon in 1979. Bit sad that Fukuoka had its last last event this year, but must be fond memories from that day.
Yeah, well, Fukuoka was, in our day, was a huge event.
It was like the World Champs, wasn't it? Like there was no World Champs and everyone went there. Yeah.
Effectively, it was labelled the World Championship, and they invited, and I've still got the book, which was the next year where I was an invited athlete, but I didn't go because I had a calf injury. But that year, I was ran up there with Bill Scott and Len Johnson, and Scotty and I ran, and we both needed a qualifier for the Olympics. Even though I was sort of more going to 10, Scotty was more 10, but we were thinking marathon as well. And we actually dead heated in the race to 11:55. You'll see us in the ranking list together. And we'd raced each other to blazes, for 26 miles. And I'd got ahead of him, he got ahead of me. And then at Fukuoka, there's this sort of quite steep climb to the track of a couple of 100 metres. And the last lap is around the track. And around the track, I think I said to Scotty, do you want to, dead heat and hold hands, which I'd done previously with a couple of things in Interclub, which I don't know why I did it. I used to enjoy doing it with people. And so it could have been a touch of arrogance behind that. Anyway, we came across the line. Scotty collapsed on the track, and I wasn't too bad, so I felt as though I'd won. And I leant down to him and I said, Scotty, you're okay. He said, just leave me here, Rod. I've been to hell and back. And that was it. That was his commentary. And then what we got was Scotty got the result, by a hundredth of a second because they had timing. So he was 6th and I was 7th. But Scotty, great man that he is, he gave me the 6th place trophy, and he's got the 7th place trophy.
What a legend! Yeah.
So it's a nice story, and Scotty's Scotty and Fitzy and Steve A and all those guys, Deke, of course. We had a wonderful era where we loved our athletics, and we competed hard against each other, but I think we had a really deep respect for everybody.
We'll get to a bit more conversation about the marathon later on, because I've got a couple of listeners have written in some questions knowing that you'd be on the show, and interested to hear your thoughts on it. But I want to take you back to Montreal, 1976, the Olympics, your first Olympics, where you said before you had the heat of the 10K, 4 days later, the final. And then you also entered in the marathon as well. So it was a pretty strong couple of, I think there was the marathon was 5 days after the 10K final. So that's a huge 8-9 days.
Yeah, no, it was phenomenal. And I didn't really have any intention of running the marathon. I'd only run one marathon prior to it. In those days, it was, I consider myself a 10K runner and a cross-country runner. And more cross-country than road, really, always. Love cross-country. But there was, Dave Chettle was in the race and he'd been selected. But in those days, there was the opportunity for the manager to fill the spaces. A bit different to today, where it's a lot tougher to make the team. And I put up my hand well and truly before, saying, look, if I get through the 10, I'd love to do it. And the 20K walker, brilliant walker, Ross Hayward, who was a very good runner, he put up his hand as well. So the three of us ran. And I sort of, tell the story that Ross and Dave both pulled out. Dave had a shocker, nothing like his career. He's, one of our great marathoners. But I was in the lead at halfway, and I was starting to even, think about my speech. But the 210s, I did get fairly blistered. The spikes, my Nike spikes had no blisters on them at all. They were all on my feet. Mm-hmm. The spikes were perfectly unblistered. And I got through that, and no excuse, and I probably wouldn't have made much difference anyway, but I got through halfway, and I was very, very pleased to finish it. we were running up an avenue at the end called Prefontaine Drive.
Yeah.
And those of you who know running, it was stunning to be on Prefontaine Drive. Steve Pre had died, the year before. Just before I'd run a 16K cross country, I heard about it that morning, and it actually inspired me to run possibly one of my best cross countries ever. Because I thought, if Pre's no longer with us, I've got no excuse. And hammered Scotty that day by a minute, actually. So running down Prefontaine Drive was great. And another little thing about that 76 Olympics, if you look at the lighting of the torch, you'll see two young athletes, a female and male. The young male, his surname was Prefontaine. So, it had a sort of a really
significance,
interesting feeling. And, I was inspired by people like Pre and Brendan Foster. I named my first son after Bren because I just loved the way they ran. Really,
you mean like the gut running off the front?
Yeah, the gut running, and Brendan in particular followed what Clarkey had tried to do. A real kick down and surging. And I tried to adapt that to my own running because I wasn't fast, as I mentioned. I had no real speed per se, but I really needed to learn to be able to run as quickly as I could to the finish. So I learned from Brendan and Pre that you don't have to run fast at the start. In fact, I'm all about relaxation at the start, but there's a moment when you decide to go. And when you go, you don't go half-hearted. It's, to the finish.
Yeah. And Brendan was, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he'd throw in like a 60, 62 second lap, like 3 or 4 laps out, wouldn't he? Is that correct?
Yeah, when it was, hardly known. In fact, he occasionally, I think there was a 3K once where he threw in 57 or something like that, in the middle. And not when you'd expect it, not in the last third, actually in, a little bit after halfway. And I passed that on to Mona. Mona had some fabulous battles with Andy Lloyd. And Lloydie had a great kick, as we know. And we had to find ways to handle Lloydie. And one of the things that I'd learnt in my own career, but Mona had more skills than me and was able to do it, with sheer rhythm. He learnt to be able to do a savage kick down and just get people off the bit. He won 4 Zatopeks doing that.
Yeah. What did you learn from that first Olympic experience?
I learned I wanted to go to the next one.
Yeah, motivated.
What a lot of people do. I felt as though I could be at a very high level, and I also had started to think about marathon as potentially a better fit for me. So I do remember sitting in the sauna after the marathon in the village by myself and basically committing myself to getting to Moscow in the marathon. So I'd made that decision. Now, of course, then you've got to execute it. But I had it in my mind, that was what I was going to do. But I learned, there's some great runners around the world, and it's a great sport, and it's a beautiful sport.
Yeah, and you were 35th there, 2:23. So I know there's some listeners who would be interested in what that result was there. So then 4 years later, it wasn't probably as simple to Moscow, Russia. The boycott happened for a number of countries. And from what I understand, you played a big part in getting the Australian team there.
Yeah, and, it's something I don't dwell on much nowadays. I'm incredibly proud that we went. And when I got most proud was in 2000. We created a cup, a souvenir cup, was Australia uninterrupted to the Olympics. Never missed the Olympics, and that's still with us. And at the time, Coatsy, I roomed with Coatsy in when he was with the rowing team in Montreal. Phil Coles, who was the manager at the time in 1980, Ron Casey, who was the commentator for Seven, was so committed to getting to the Olympics. And we worked extreme, and Ron Clark was fantastic in the background. So we had a lot of people helping, but I, for whatever reason, I ended up being the sort of the front person of it, because a lot of the swimmers were young. I was 30, so people like Deke and Gerard Barrett and that, they were much younger than me. Rick Mitchell was very significant and worked with me on it, the late great Rick Mitchell. And so I'm really, really pleased we went. Now we have a UN, United Nations motion before every Olympics saying, let's make sure we don't have any wars or while the Olympics are on, and most countries vote for it. But I do note Australia didn't vote for it this year, which was very, very unfortunate. Australia politically. But I think it's fantastic that we ended up getting there. But I ended up getting there tired, I have to say. But Deke ran magnificently, and it was the start of the great Deke Costello career.
And you were 28th, I think, 2:20:42. Hot day too.
Yeah, it was very hot. It was so hot, Brady. It was ridiculously hot.
40 degrees.
Yeah, you guys don't know what it's like. No, it was very hot and very humid. Better safe for everybody. And summer marathons are like that. We've had Beijing in 2008 was very hot. Rio was very hot. Tokyo this year, I wasn't there, but gee, you knew it was hot. And it's part of what you deal with. I thought I was a pretty good runner in the heat, so I never ever made it as an excuse. I after the race, I had to be carried to the toilet by Deke and Chloe. I was so dehydrated, and it was to finish, I thought was a fair bit of courage, I'd have to say. But I was so pleased that we saw the start of Deke Costello's career, where he ran so beautifully to run 10th as a kid, basically.
Yeah. And can you talk a bit about that era of like training? So I know you mentioned Pat Clohessy before, but at this stage, had you worked out your own system and were coaching yourself, or what did it look like? Yeah,
so essentially, I, like everybody else, I ran as a kid. I was a keen runner, but got to first year uni and lost my way. It was 1968, and we were burning the campus down at Monash, the May riots in France, etc., etc. And I gambled. I love gambling, still do, but I have to keep myself away from it. So I virtually didn't run for 2 full years. But Bruce Jones was there, who's a double national cross-country winner. He's now living in New Zealand. But Bruce got me back running, and that was a story in itself. I was just driving down Ferntree Gully Road, if you know Monash, just before Monash, the Huntingdale Road lights, and I literally, something happened. I don't know what it was, because I'm not a religious person.
Yeah.
You've got to go for a run. And I thought, it just came, and we had a 9:00 lecture with Bruce, and I sat down and I said, Bruce, I've got to go for a run. And Bruce was one of our best runners at the time. I've got to go for a run. He said, well, come down to the sports centre and we'll go for a run. I had to actually find some shoes to run in. And Bruce, of course, decided to do a 12K loop out of Monash. I hadn't run for ages. I'd played basketball, that was it. And of course, he started dancing around me and, making me. I got there in the end, but it was terrible. And I vowed then, I'm going to beat Bruce. I'm going to beat Bruce. And I hadn't beaten him at school. He was at Melbourne High. And so I started training again. And Bruce and I substantially developed a bit of an approach. I'd done the classic quarters, with a long interval, and I was able to run a half a dozen quarters in 59 seconds, with a long enough interval, slow jog, walk, and I was still running 4:10 for 1500. I couldn't understand this, and I remember hearing Clarkey say, you don't get to stop, at the end of a lap. And I'd read Frank Shorter. He's got a lovely book, short story. It's a mimeograph. And Shorter was the hero. He'd won the 72 Olympics. And he'd mentioned a session where he'd done quarters, 400s, at sort of race pace, but with a very short recovery. And he called it a 100-meter jog. And I tried the 100-meter jog and couldn't do it, so I turned it into 200. And gradually I turned it into a float. And that's where the quarters came from, 8 quarters with a 200 float. And I went immediately from 409 to 344 in 2 years.
Once you got the strength there.
Yeah, got the strength, and I was concentrating on strength rather than anything else to be able to use my limited speed. So gradually developed, and then I was Deacon Tim O'Shannessy, Pat Clow as he is, he's a devious person. He got me to pick him up from Monash. So I'd pick him up in Barker's Road and take him to training, and Clow was there, and I started working with Clow. And Clow taught me relaxation. He really understood the bowling run, just going for a comfortable run and feeling good. He taught me feel in a big way, because we didn't have, we had the Nilex clock at the time. That was our timing device. So Chloe and I started working together, and I was really with Chloe in 75, 76 as I boomed. And then for the next 4 years, it was Chloe and I, and we developed the system together. And I borrowed a couple of things we'd done at Melbourne High, Como, which was a hill session, and Lincoln Hills in the gardens, and gradually got to Fernie, the long run. Chloe said, you've got to get the volume up. So that's, effectively how it works. So I give Bruce, myself and Chloe, and then when Chloe went to Canberra and Deke went to Canberra, it was a fully developed system by then.
It's a very unique situation though, where you're the athlete, but as well as the coach in a way, and having that input to the coach, who's then like, he could have easily just said, that's my way of the highway, kind of have no input kind of thing. Like, it sounds like a very special relationship amongst you all.
Yeah, no, and it's because it's based on a set of principles.
12, isn't there? 12 principles?
Yeah. So we don't, we never ever, people ask me what my favourite session is, or what's the key session. Both Chloe and I would say the long run. If you're really insistent, it's the long run. And then what's your second favourite session? Well, it's the middle of the week long run. And it's a way of telling people about volume. And the classic is, a marathon or a 10,000 metres. It's a real competition with gravity. And there's an iron law of specificity. Unless you run a lot, you cannot achieve your potential. Now, those who are really gifted can, find other ways of doing it if you're very light framed and so forth. But Deke was a heavy guy, for instance. And Chloe would always say, Deke had to do the first 20K before I got out of bed in the morning because I was skinny and light. And it's true. Deke did a much higher volume than I did. And Mona, interestingly though, Karen, I learnt so much through coaching Karen. I worked out very quickly she was capable of the same volume as Mona. And what's more, recovered quicker because of the higher fat content. So she actually recovered more quickly from big big Sunday runs than we would have. So it is an empirically led system. We learned by doing, basically, and gradually but it's got more flexibility than people give it credit for, because some young people are at a totally different level of development, but the principles are the same. Run a bit.
Yeah. So is it run as much as you can handle? Is that kind of what you mean? Because there's going to be some people out here who are busy listeners, busy 3 times a week they can run. So you're suggesting they kind of do as much as they can fit in those 3 days and not worry about the workouts and go for overall mileage? Or I know what you mean, because you're talking about the most elite runners we've got in the country.
I'm all for the person who just wants to get a bit better. Because what happens once they get a bit better, they want to get a bit better.
Yeah.
And then they want to get a bit better. So they start managing their life around running. But if you're fitting your running into life, which most people do, what I encourage people to do is make sure you run long. Now that's in inverted commas, because long is a developmental thing. Long once a week, a medium run once a week, and then if you've got time in another run, belt home. Really try and run the last 10, 15 minutes as really solidly. That would fit within our systematic framework.
Do you think there's been a flip with that though, where people maybe take, they prioritize those workouts and hit them as fresh as possible 2 or 3 times a week, and kind of neglect those other days and cut their medium long run maybe 20, 30 minutes shorter? Whereas you're saying back when you got, and we're talking about the most successful era of marathon running and half marathon running, I think you'd say as well. So do you see that stuff now and kind of get a bit frustrated?
Yes, I do. Another saying is you've got to be fit in order to train. And I suspect, and I think it's at middle distance as well, but I won't say it at 800. I'll say it 1500 up, because I get killed if I mention 800. Although Chloe would argue that he's done very well at 800. I do reckon there's too many shortcuts. People think that they can train before they're fit enough to do the training, and the so-called sessions, which we all do, hard, easy, 3 days in the week or thereabouts, or 3.5 in 4 and 10, or however you want to set up your training schedule. In order to do them well, you've got to be very, very fit, and I would argue that we're better off doing smaller sessions at a high quality, and making sure your long runs and medium runs are done as effectively as possible. Now, people think, is this long so distance? Well, nothing like it. We laugh about, some of our 10 milers on a Monday night or a Saturday morning. We would seriously run home. Now, because it's an Ilex clock, we don't know what we did.
Yeah.
But I would argue that we would have quite often hit 4:30 miles. I'm quite confident we would have been doing that towards the end.
Well under 3-minute K pace towards the end of So would that happen your Monday you're rolling home like that, off tired legs on the Sunday, the Tuesday shorter workout, the Wednesday would you get rolling again before the Thursday workout?
We had some, and we never raced.
Yeah,
we never raced.
Inverted commas are going here, listeners.
Such a high quality, pack. It was called the pack. And those who chased us were the posse.
Yeah.
We would roll home, and of course, if we weren't ready to roll home, we didn't. And of course, we relaxed, and we didn't get defeated. And I was quite competitive. Now, Deke was phenomenal at not taking the bit, and I think he learnt more about relaxation than I did. I think, part of his strength, and I think Mona's the same, sometimes people would laugh when they went for a long run with Mona. You know, he'd stop and have a chat with somebody, you know, after 10K, and you know, so this idea of relaxation, but running as you feel and really coming home. But I have a proviso, because if people were written a schedule, they feel as though they've got to do the schedule. Whereas my argument is the schedule's there as a guide, and you should run as you feel, not what Strava tells you should be feeling.
Okay, so if you weren't feeling it, people would just ease off, saying, I'm not getting involved in this kick down today. I'll see us back at the park or where, at the cars or wherever. But if you're feeling good, there's a license to open up a bit.
Absolutely, and even on our easy 10 on a Friday night, it could get quite willing at the bottom of the 10. You know, quite willing.
Oh, it sounds like such an amazing time, and you must have formed some amazing relationships throughout that time as well. And obviously, you said before, like racing each other, like you had a lot of respect for each other when you'd race each other as well. Must have so many fond memories looking back on it.
Yeah, no, the relationships are great. I feel as though whenever we bump into each other, we've always got that camaraderie. We did a lot of mileage together, and we did camps together. So we're at Falls Creek every year. And for, I remember John Axenteeth and I did the 4 weeks, the first 4-week block. Up until then, it had just been, 10 days, and we decided to have a bit of a crack at 4 weeks. And then it became, I spent 3 months up there in 1980 to make the team. And our stars now spend a significant period of time up there, which is a little bit about, fitting the life into running. If you're going to get to a very high level. We would see ourselves all as good friends.
And what you've just explained as well, you guys are doing this after working a day's work. Like you're meeting after work on a Monday and a Friday to do these 10 miles and stuff. No one was the professional athlete that we see now?
Nope, none of us were professional. Deke probably became close to professional when he went to the AIS, but he was still working as well. And we had rules. 5:35. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 5:05 Wednesday. If you weren't there, we were off. And if you were late, you ran backwards on the tan. So everybody knew the first lap was always on the tan. You ran backwards and joined in. Saturday morning was 9:30. Sunday morning up the hills. Well, it started at 10, and then I said, all the Catholics wanted to go to church, and I said, no, look, we're getting up there a bit earlier. So I think Chloe and Trevor Vincent got permission from the Pope for us to go earlier. So we went, started at 9, and then we got to 8:30 because we're running long. And they became set rules.
Yeah.
And it was part of the beauty, because we encouraged anybody to run with us. And everybody knew that they could come down and run with us any night, any day. Again, I think it was really good because other coaches would learn bits of the system. One of the ones I talk about is Sean Quilty, wonderful athlete. He did a lot of running with us, but his coach, John Hurst, was, I chatted with Hursty all the time. It was an accommodation. So Sean would run with us perhaps 3 times, Sunday morning, and he'd do Friday night and a couple of others. And others did the same. They joined in, and I didn't see myself as competitive with other coaches at all. I wanted us to work as a team, basically, to get as many good runners as we could.
Yeah, and when you've got a system like that set up, I can imagine as the leader, and you've obviously worked a professional career in leadership and stuff like that as well, it just makes it much smoother, because everyone just knows what the rules are, the system to follow. You don't have to stand up at the front every day and explain what's happening, because you just follow the same thing week in, week out, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, no, that's right. Tim Oz makes the joke that you don't need to write anything down because it's the same week after week. At Tim O'Shaughnessy, who's still a promising senior. yeah, so yeah, I think it really did help people having that structure and everybody welcome. And, we saw it everywhere, lots and lots of PBs and people running well. So I think it worked well. What we've got now is we've got a whole series of small groups. But I know there's some work being done, particularly middle distance, to try and get some people together. And I know, Andy up in Bendigo's, doing a bit to try and get people together and so forth. So I'm a big believer in the critical mass. If you've got a group, you've got a shared ambition, it just takes all the effort away because you know where to go. Those moments, oh, God, I've got to run 18 miles tonight, but there's going to be somebody to do it.
Yeah, you just got to get there.
Yeah.
Once you get out of the car. You explained in kind of the quarters before how you kind of changed it from the longer kind of, interval between the repetitions to the floats. But is it right to say that Deeks got the naming rights for that workout? Should it be you, the 8x400 with 200 meters float between? He's been doing it. Everyone's been calling it Deeks quarters for years.
How to don't get me started. So fartlek, Deeks quarters, are both mine. But I'm happy to have stars like them attached to them. No, the quarters were definitely mine with Bruce Jones. Before even Deek was I think he may not have even been alive. And the fartlek's a classic story. There is a bit of difference over the way Mona tells it.
Well, we've had him on a couple of times. I'm pretty sure he's told his version, so it'll be great to hear yours.
I know. So my version is Mona rang me and wanted some coaching, and then we met, and I gave him a diary which he talks about how significant that was. And if you read his diary, it's a fabulous read. Anyway, it was on the phone, and I said, just do some fartlek, Mona. And he was a kid at the time still. And Mona, being Mona and being, Brady or anybody, give me some structure. What does fartlek mean? I said, well, what do you mean, what does fartlek mean? It means speed play. It means run as you feel. It means run fast, run slow. And anyway, but he wanted structure. So I literally, over the phone, just made it up. 290s, 460s, 430s, 415s, equivalent recovery, but make sure you float. Because people, when they say I'm doing intervals, I bet if you had, 10 people out there, a lot of people think the interval is the actual repetition. The interval is the time taken between repetitions.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's all about the interval, what you do in the interval. And so I said, it's got to be a float, same time difference, but a float. As it turned out to be 20 minutes. At that moment, I didn't know. I just said 4. And anyway, it became Mottram fartlek. And it's all over the bloody world. Anyway,
it is, yeah.
And it'll never be Rabs fartlek. I understand that.
And it's one of the best bang for your buck 20-minute. If you're time poor, you do, a 20-minute warm-up, 20-minute fartlek, that one, 20-minute cool down. That's a great way to get very fit within the hour.
It's a phenomenal session. And, everybody's done it. And, lesser knowns like, Nick Harrison, around 210.
Yeah.
A while ago. So many have done it. Sean Crichton, he started actually, he was the first one to really sort of try and create a record out of it, and I think he was one of the first ones to run something like 13:25 or something. I always likened it, if you could break 14 in the quarters, relaxed, you'd break 14 at 5K. And it was a reasonable test with the quarters because it's 12 laps. But those 2 sessions, I think they're the right size of a session to go with the volume. The volume's critical. And we train twice a day, at least 12 sessions a week. I encourage people to have one or two days off.
Because that's been the misconception over the years, that people have looked at, how can you run a fast marathon doing a 20-minute fartlek on a Tuesday, at 15 or 17-minute Deeks quarters workout on a Thursday, and a hilly tempo on a Saturday. But you're saying that's just the meat and the sandwich. You got to do all that other stuff, alongside it.
It's a whole cake.
Yeah,
whole cake. And I'll tell you the story of Deek. It's well known. We used to have a competition for successive days. And, I think I'd got up to, 270 or something. And there's a long story about Deek and VCE and, he's bloody doing his 20 minutes. We had a high court ruling over what a run was.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be 20. It had to be over 20 minutes. It's now 23 because we're so slow. But Deek did, leading into his world championship, 2 full years of twice a day, every day.
Every day, yeah.
Never missed.
Consistency. That's pretty phenomenal, isn't it? With all the things that can come up in life.
Yeah, and now Sean Crichton, who's bloody in his 50s.
Yeah, I follow him on Strava.
He's done 4 years without missing a day, averaging 50K. That's just ridiculous.
There's some days there where he's just hanging on, though, that we were talking a couple of weeks ago.Maybe he should take a couple of days off to get his body right, but he's got through it. He's keeping that streak alive.
I know.
Rab, what about I've got a couple of interesting questions for you here. I'm sure you get this one a lot. We talked on our podcast actually last week about all the Australian records getting broken. Pretty much, I think we figured out 800 through to the half marathon, minus Keren's women's half marathon, minus Craig's men's 5K. But the 2 marathon ones, no one's looked close. You got near Deek or Benita. Well, we got close relatively, but not anywhere super close. And what do you put it down to? We've got the talent, obviously, because we got the guys are fast over the 5, the 10.
Yeah.
And the half.
I think we've had quality marathoners, and I know Nick Harrison, loved the thought that he was the last fastest man back in 2004 up until Liam.
So on your system, and then Troopy on pretty much the same system as well, wouldn't he? Like the last sub 210 guy.
Yeah, Troopy was very similar, and Troopy ran 13:14.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Minor variations, but no, substantially, he was with Mona and so forth. People like Brett and Robinson and, Jack
Rayner,
they should be able to run faster. I really do believe they should be able to run faster. Now, I'm not au fait anymore with how they train and what they do, so I can't really understand it. Brett's a finalist at 5,000 and, he's had a real crack at marathon. He's still running 2:11. My suspicion is they're not doing the consistent volume that I think they need. And that goes for, the last 10 years, I'm talking.
And what is that number you reckon they need?
You've got to be, minimum 160K. Minimum. But I like 180 to 200K.
Yeah.
But over many, 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 many weeks.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think, I can do 3 months of long running. Look, if you keep Kipchoge, maybe. I'm just not convinced our runners, and I'm talking women as well. Now, Sinead and Jess have shown that the women are, running relatively quick. They're still a fair way away from Benita's time. But clearly they've shown that you can run faster. Do they focus enough on the marathon? Not convinced. Too many races. I understand why they race. And I'm not talking about anybody specifically here. I'm just saying that I think too many races and not enough training. Not enough big blocks of training. Not enough cross-country season. I'm a big believer in cross-country. Monna and Deke and Nick and Troopy, they did a full cross-country season, Crichton, a lot of them. I'm not convinced they're as focused on the marathon as they could be. Now, to be fair, they've got a lot more opportunities to do things to not focus on the marathon.
Yeah.
They've got road races all over the world. They've got indoors. It just goes on and on. They've got world championships every second year. Back in the day, it wasn't quite as obvious. Back in our day, City to Surf was the big race and everybody ran that, but there weren't any others, that people had to run.
So you mean like they've got to, I guess because they're doing it for their job as well, got to make the most of some of those races with appearance fees and sponsor bonuses and prize money and things like that, which then leads to tapering for the race, doing the race, recovery for the race. Whereas you guys might have been, 40, 45 weeks of year round doing 180, 200K weeks, whereas these guys are dipping up and down, and then maybe, 2 or 3 months before a marathon, they go into a 12-week marathon block.
Yep. And, when I've said, athletes have come to me with their diary, I do a bit of a diary analysis, and the first thing I do is add up the long runs.
Yeah.
We did, in a 52-week year, we do at least 40 to 45 Sunday runs. That's the difference.
And you're talking like 2.5 hours?
2.5 hours.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the odd 3 hour. We'd always do a 3 hour, 5 weeks out. It's a tradition I've done with all my marathoners. Just to go, beyond what you'd normally do.
That's another thing I think's changed though. Sorry, I reckon that's come down to 2 hours now. Like everyone thinks, if you're doing 2 hours on Sunday, you're doing, enough. But maybe it needs to go back up to 2.5 minimum.
Yeah, you've got to be running. And
you're doing them over hills. Yeah,
and over hills. And then we do an 18-miler on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And I even, I try and say to more middle distance types, people would be shocked at what Craig was doing with Nick and before him, Bruce. He was doing substantial volume. People won't believe it. He ran his 3:48 mile, running his 15-miler every Sunday, good bowling 10-milers. He did much more than people would be prepared. They'd probably say, no, it can't be. Craig Mottram couldn't do that. Couldn't be doing that, but he was. And I don't know enough about Stewie and that, but I'm sure they're doing good volume, even at middle distance.
Yeah, I think it's pretty well documented that he still do, the 8x1K and the longer workout. And then, I think I read somewhere they hadn't ran a 60-second 400-meter rep or anything like that before he ran that 350 down in Tasmania by himself. Like he's got, it's all off strength. It's not off that top end speed stuff.
Fabulous strength.
Strength. Back to the Mottram reference. Like, what was it like in 2009 when I'm assuming you met him or he called you up at the, after the split with Nick? It was pretty documented at the time as well, and common knowledge that wasn't the cleanest separation, I guess. And then you were approached to take things over. Yeah,
so it's up to Craig to tell those stories, but I'd met, I knew Craig and met him, and and back in 2000 when he was a kid and made the team, loved him as a runner, always loved him as a guy. I think he's a really smart guy, so I've always admired him. And then after 208, he talked to me 2 or 3 times before asking me to coach, because he talked generally. He was very, very good about, look, do I go to America? Do I get coached from America? What are my options here? And he looked, widely, and we had 2 or 3, long coffees in Albert Park and places. And then he asked me to coach him, which was, great. And I'd sort of dropped coaching a bit because I'd been in Hong Kong, and Monna and Karen had gone, and Nick and everybody, Nick Harrison, and but it was Mottram, and I certainly wanted to help. But he was also very injured.
Achilles, wasn't it, at the time?
Achilles, he had significant Achilles issues. But he also hadn't finished his degree. So I'm an educator. Craig finished the degree, so he did that. And he worked really, really hard to get back to full fitness. And it took a while. And again, it was there was no real reason why he may have, had lots of Achilles injuries. It could have been weakness, could have been overdoing it, could have been not having enough rest, could have been a whole host of reasons. But we basically just went straight back to nothing and then build up from that. And he'll laugh about, I'm a big believer in walking, strong walking for lower legs. Did the same with Susie Power when she was badly injured and didn't look like she could get back. I'm a big believer in power walking. I mean, getting out and walking
briskly.
For somebody like Craig Mottram and Susie Power, they think, this is insane. How could he? But they got into it and did it. I just think it's easily the best thing you can do for lower leg injuries. Just gets the blood flow. You learn to walk quite fast. I'm not talking a dawdle here. I'm walking fast. So Mottram did like everybody else did his walking. I still think he disowns it. He probably said, I didn't walk, but he did.
And then it must have been really rewarding getting him to that 2012 London Olympics. I remember I was sitting in the crowd at I don't know if it was called the Melbourne Track Classic when it was raining that night, where he because we hadn't seen a few results from him for a while, and then he came out and, ran with Collis off the front there and kicked past him in the last lap and ran 13.18. And it was kind of like you could see the emotion on his face coming down the straight, and it was kind of the rain coming down. And I'm sure you were in the audience there that night as well, and just think he was back in a way.
Yeah, no, it was a great moment for him and me because we worked so hard on the injury. And he had a lot of support from various people to get right. He went to Sweden in the end for his operations. But it was interesting before that. He had a shocker in Sydney in a 1500. Absolute shocker for him. For us, it's probably not too bad. And after it, he went to the warm-up track and he was seriously running around the warm-up track at bloody 4:30. I thought, oh God, I've got an angry man on my books here. And he came over to the top, over to the, to where I was at the warm-up track, and he said, that was shit. I'm going to make that Olympic team. 2 weeks. Just you wait, Henry Higgins, basically. And then went off running. And then, he calmed down. He came back and he said, what am I going to do? And I said, you're going to Falls Creek for 2 weeks. Because I felt he needed to just take everything away, because he had all the, stresses of life. And this is why I love people going away. I used to make all my athletes go to camp. And there's so much research behind it. It's called the camp effect. So we sent Mottram up there basically by himself. I don't even think Christine went up with him and stayed for the 2 weeks. And what he did was that the first week, I had to organise him to do his 400s. He wanted to do it on the track, so at Albury. So I rang up Pat Scammell, who's another wonderful athlete I coached, mainly in the third part of their career, and he's just a wonderful athlete. And I rang up Scan. I said, look, Mottram wants to do 400s, because it's a classic. Mottram knew what it meant. He already understood. If I can get a good 400, I can get my confidence up. So Scam got the key. Mottram drove from Falls Creek to Albury and ran 13:20 for the quarters.
The Deeks quarters, yeah.
and coming back, I'm right. Well, just take the next few days, not too bad. And then he came down, ran 13:18, and tactically we'd worked it out. Collis is a beautiful runner, but we knew how we could beat him. And Collis, we think, played into Craig's hands. And Craig, outkicked him over the last 200. He's not the first person outkicked by Craig Mottram.
Yeah. It's an interesting one though, isn't it? Because you don't want to be racing the workout too close to the race, but at the same time, he needed that confidence booster to then go to the race. Obviously,
it was 10 days before, which is about right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
they were a really substantial, and I had, speaking of Scammell, Scammell had a what we'd call a signature session. It wasn't mine. It was Dave Moorcroft's of 3 sets, 1K 600, 1K 600, 1K 600. And Scammell knew when he got it right, he knew he was ready to go. He knew he could run 145 or 335. So, learning how an athlete thinks about what they can do, is part of the coaching game.
Yeah, and knowing when to implement that kind of stuff. Hey, a few quick ones for you before we wrap up. Sydney Olympics head athletics coach. Yeah, Mona's racing. I'm not sure if you had any other athletes also racing, but must be the hype around Kathy Freeman at that games as well. Home Olympics. Explain that experience to us. It must have been amazing.
I often say, how lucky could a person be head coach of the track and field team at the Sydney Olympics? Best seat in the house. I had 6 of my own athletes in the team.
6, okay.
Mona and Karen were the stars. But I had other terrific runners. But we had a large distance team, and while I didn't coach them all, I had terrific relationships with their coaches. So Mark Crowley, who was with Norm Osborne, a great 1500 metre runner. So we had a terrific team. So I loved the distance aspect of it. We had a terrific team, terrific camaraderie, just being head coach, working with Freeman was wonderful. She's just a wonderful athlete. I went to Eton to watch her train for about 10 days with Peter Fortune, and she trained hard. She really trained hard, and again, that was something I learned. About what it means to be a really classy 400 metre runner. But again, Fort works a bit on volume, but in a different way. So it's irreplaceable having had that experience, and wonderful team, and it was been all downhill since.
Was it stressful? You got a lot of people to manage in a position like that.
Yeah, of course, and you felt that I've got a whole raft of memories about the stresses and so forth. I always remember having dinner with Freeman in England after she trained hard, and Murray Plant, the late Murray Plant, was at dinner, and we were talking generally, and of course the Olympic 400 metres was on everybody's mind, and Murray started suggesting that it was Catherine, it's just like the school sports. You just run a really top class 400 and collect your ribbon. And so it became a bit of a joke. We called her the girl in Europe because she was in Europe most of the time, and she was running the school sports, and we saw what happened. It was phenomenal.
Were you trackside? Do you have a special viewing position of that race?
Right over the finish line.
Yeah.
It was every session, every day. And, the memories, I got to know Jane Saville really well, went to it, had a camp with Jane in 1997 for the Athens Worlds that Mono ran his great bronze in, and we were at a place called Ostia outside Rome, and all the walkers came with us. So Nick Ahern and Jane Saville and others. And so when Jane at the Olympics, I was down at the walking and coming up, and I thought she had the gold. And I ran, I cheered her just as she was heading down the race. And then I raced in to get to my seat.
In the stadium.
In the meantime, she'd been
qualified.
yeah. I was counting the gold. And but Jane came back and got a bronze in Athens, which I saw, which was, wonderful.
Have you thought about writing a book? You got so many good stories. I've got that many more dot points here we could talk about, and I've taken up too much of your time tonight.
Yeah.
And you're good mates with Len Johnson, who's a writer. Like,
yeah, I know. Len's never made the offer.
Come on, Len. He listens to this.
Yeah. He's heard them all before. Anyway. I got a million stories. I have. Ironically, well, you can't see this because it's just a talk list, but I started collecting some stuff, and I have got sort of ideas in my head, but it's my other life as well in education, and having worked in Hong Kong and two big bureaucracies, Hong Kong and Victoria, and a relatively senior professional job in education. So I've got this idea of both careers. One a passion project and the other, a professional, well-paid project. And the common thing about it is capability building and high performance.
Yeah.
So I've got a conceptual frame that I'm thinking about, but finding time to do it's the next thing.
Yeah, we're just talking off air before we hit record, and you seem like you're a very busy man for someone who's retired, I guess.
Yeah, I'm practicing retirement really badly. So I've got a couple of boards, and one I'm chair of the Victorian Curriculum Authority and Assessment Authority, which affects all teachers. So that's it's a labour of love, but it's also a big responsibility at the time. But I'm the board chair. It's the poor staff and CEO who have to do all the work.
But you report directly to the Education Minister, isn't that right?
Yeah, so the board chair goes to the Minister, but through, the CEO and Secretary are heavily involved. And we've had, lots of issues during COVID, trying to get Year 12 through, which thankfully we've done, but not without a lot of loss for kids who have missed what I would, term a really important part of their lives, Year 11 and Year 12. It's a significant social marker, and we all look back on it. And these students are going to look back on it in a different way, but they will have had I think a different resilience than maybe we had when we went through.
Last one for you, Rab. Reflections from the Tokyo Olympics. And then,
love them.
And then into your crystal ball, predictions for how we keep that momentum going into Paris and the World Champs Com Games. Yeah,
so look, Tokyo was terrific. And those middle distance performances in particular were just wonderful. So we've got a real cohort at the moment. Some of them in America, unfortunately for us, but so be it, and they're doing really well. We had a great Tokyo, but, from Ash Maloney, through to Lyndon, through to Patrick Tiernan, some wonderful performances. We'd sensed that in Rio. There'd been an uptick in Rio. Wasn't as obvious, but there had been. And then we had a really good Com Games. The half dozen performances there were really world class. But we sort of tend to downrate it a bit because it's, the Com Games. But so we suspected we were going to do well, but we did better than we thought. There's no question about that. And now we've got a 2.5-year window to Paris. I'd like to think that we can do better because I think we had a couple of holes. I think we can definitely do better at 10K, and I definitely believe in men's marathon we can do better. We've got really good 800 and 1500, but we've got some good steeplechases, which was nice. So we've got some depth. We've got some great coaching.
Nearly full teams as well. Like, that was the most exciting thing. Every day you could, you knew someone was in action.
Every day, yeah. People progressing through the rounds. So it was exciting for us, but we've got to keep it going. And Paris will be like anything else; it'll be tough. And we've got this year in Eugene, which will be fantastic. Going to. I hope some of our distance runners are inspired to run in Eugene, and I know I would be, and I'm going. And then we've got Budapest next year, and we've got the Com Games, of course, in Birmingham. So we've got a busy schedule. That's why I hope athletes do their block of training. You've got to be very careful about. You've got to keep building the block.
Awesome, mate. Well, I've taken up enough of your time tonight. As I said, we kind of, I had a few more dot points to go. Maybe in 6 months, 12 months time, we can do a bit of a part 2 and see what your views on the sport are 12 months, down the track. And I'm just so grateful that you gave up some time for us tonight. And I know the listeners will absolutely love some of those stories in there. And massive thanks for what you've done for the sport over your years.
Great. Thanks, Brady. No, I really enjoyed it. And those who are listening, hope you get out for a lovely run tomorrow.
A long run over hills.
A long run over hills.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, mate. Awesome, mate. I'm just going to hit stop recording.